Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. The IMF and the Pakistani authorities have reached a staff level agreement after the second and the final review of the $3 billion standby arrangement. IMF Mission Chief Nathan Porter said in a statement, let me quote him, this agreement is subject to the approval by the IMF's executive board, upon which the remaining access under SPA $1.1 billion will become available, unquote. Also in a statement, the International Monetary Fund has said, let me quote, Pakistan's economic and financial position has improved in the months since the first review, with growth and confidence continuing to recover on the back of the prudent policy management and the resumption of inflows from the multilateral and bilateral partners. The statement also says the authorities also expressed interest in a successive medium-term fund-supported program with the aim of permanently resolving Pakistan's fiscal and external sustainability weaknesses, strengthening its economic recovery and laying the foundations for a strong, sustainable and inclusive growth. Also, in another major development, we have seen the State Bank of Pakistan has kept its policy rate unchanged at 22%. In a statement, the State Bank of Pakistan has said, let me quote, in approaching the decision, the MPC noted that inflation in line with earlier expectation has begun to decline. It, however, observed that despite the sharp deceleration in February, the level of inflation remains high and its outlook is susceptible to risks amidst elevated inflation expectations, unquote. Also, we have seen the government has issued a travel advisory to cut costs in another major development, which will be up for discussion in today's show. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio. Mr. Sultan Ali Haider is expert political economy. Mr. Haider, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by other participants also. I'll be introducing them as they join in. Let me begin with this particular development. IMF and Pakistani authorities reaching the staff level agreement after the final and the second review of the $3 billion standby arrangement. Now, by looking at the statements that have just come from the IMF and its mission chief, it speaks volumes that there is economic recovery and the financial position has got better. What's your understanding of the policy measures the caretaker government in particular had to put in order to bring in the economic stability while navigating through also meeting those conditions which were set by IMF?
So you see, in terms of, it was a pretty much a straight jacket, which is a very tight program, and there was a prescription that had to be followed by this government, and the program was designed to end by March and April, till the time elections happen. So the caretaker government followed the prescription in terms of the curtailing the spending, maintaining the interest rates at the level that they are, and it is also ensuring in terms of the foreign exchange reserves grow or they maintain at the same level. So a current account deficit remains in check. So those are the things which has led relatively to the stability of the economy, and also in terms of it gives comfort that whatever the government had agreed in terms of the IMF program, government has followed. So it not only showed the intentions that it would follow whatever is agreed, but it has also followed through on that commitment. So that is a very positive thing, and that is what IMF is recognizing.
Right. So what does this particular agreement, does it impact overall when we talk about the market sentiment? In particular, we saw the bullish trend at Pakistan Stock Exchange. Also, there was also a little bit of appreciation in the value of the rupee against the greenback as well.
Okay, so I think there are two contexts, and we need to step back and look at two different dimensions. So one dimension is that historically, if we look at the last 10-15 years, right? So there have been instances where the government is to enter a new IMF program, irrespective of the regime, and they would take time. The finance minister would take time, and politically, it's not the right thing. Every government says that IMF puts in these conditionalities, and it's burdensome for the populace. So when that drags on, that would always create this sort of negative sentiment and an illusion of political or economic instability. When that starts to happen, then the confidence evaporates, and the value of our currency begins to slide down. When our value of our currency slides down, then repayments become more difficult, so fiscal pressures increase. So that's a negative spiral, and we have seen a number of times. For example, also we remember in 2018, it took a lot of time. The new government came in, and it took almost 1 year to start the new program. When this, for the standby agreement, again, there was so much pressure that the expectation was that Pakistan would again go through the same spiral. So with the standby agreement, there was discomfort that, okay, there was a gap between the new government coming in and negotiating a new program. So that is why this SBA was created. So IMF stepped in, the government also agreed. So now then when IMF is giving a certification that everything is going according to plan, so this gives a lot of comfort. Now I'll come to the second part of it, a second dimension of it rather. Second dimension is, what does IMF do? Because people do not understand. Why? Because IMF is not giving a lot of money, right? So it's like our remittances are much higher, right? So for example, we expect that another 1.1 billion will come in as per the release after the IMF board meeting end of April, right? But our remittances hover between $2 to $3 billion, right? So why is that significant? It's not the money that IMF brings in. IMF actually looks at your, essentially you can say, business plan or budget plan, not only for 1 year, but for rather 3 to 5 years. And it gives a certification that we have looked at this country's plans, and its plans make sense. They do have the resources, and this is how the resources will build up, and they will be able to repay their commitments. So when other lenders, other multilateral agencies, or other lenders like World Bank or even other private commercial lenders, they look at that certificate, then they see that, okay, IMF is also confident, okay, this country plans to raise, for example, $5 billion, $10 billion, but it's part of the plan and they will be able to repay that. Then they are willing to contribute to that. That
right.
is why IMF certification is very important.
Very important.
And that is why when IMF is saying in this program that now they are willing to negotiate the next medium-term program, that is what has given confidence to the market that, okay, we are on track. That means for 3 to 5 years, we are in the safe zone.
Right. Let me bring in Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, a former advisor of the Ministry of Finance, joining us on Skype. Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Now, this staff-level agreement between IMF and Pakistani authorities have been reached, and later on, subject to the executive board's approval, Pakistan would be given the access of $1.1 billion, the remaining of the standby arrangements amount. Now, what does that basically depict about the commitment of the Pakistani authorities while navigating through economic challenges, at the same time keeping in line with the conditions which were set by IMF, that has naturally increased that particular trust and confidence as far as Pakistan's commitment towards economic stabilization is concerned?
So Jawad, in the short run, it's a good omen for Pakistan, considering that Pakistan's gross financing needs of 25 billion this year in terms of dollars, and approximately the same amount next year and the same amount in the ensuing years will be comfortably fulfilled. So the problem here is that whenever there is a balance of payments challenge, the international architecture kind of dictates that countries go to the IMF. The problem is that Pakistan's been to the IMF too many times. You know, this is our 23rd facility. But being in the facility for the past 6 months, and also the measures that the establishment and the caretakers took, what you see is certainly a macro stability returning to the country. When I say macro stability, let me take a second to explain to the nation what I mean. Inflation is tapering from a high of 38 a few months ago. CPI year on year has come down to 23% in February. Current account deficit, which is a main challenge why countries end up with the IMF, and so did Pakistan, is now about $1 billion for the first 8 months of this financial year. The same period last year, it was hovering around near $4 billion. So, of course, imports have been curbed and the effect is there. And as current account uh, is more comfortable, the foreign exchange reserves were around $4 billion when the program came in, and today we stand near $8 billion. And for me, the more comforting part after the macroeconomic stability measures is the fact that Pakistan is comfortable to finance the needs that it has in terms of the rollovers with the friendly countries, the multilateral payments, the bilateral payments, and Pakistan has a heavy payment of $1 billion that it needs to make on its bond in April, which should be comfortably handled, and the reserves would hopefully end up above 8 or around $9 billion as we close this year. But um, you always remember that the IMF programs are designed for stabilization and inherently will slow your growth. That's the consequence of taking a higher monetary policy stance or a tight monetary policy stance, which the country did take. And so our growth will remain modest, around 2% this year. Hopefully, agriculture may push it beyond 2%, but between 2.5 somewhere. So that's a modest growth compared to our population growth of nearly 2.5%. Inflation is still above target, but tapering. But all in all, the elevated external financing needs would be met, and we would start to see that the stability should hopefully also manifest itself in the continued stabilization of the currency, which was gyrating when we didn't have the program, and now is around 278, 280 mark. It could move either way, because we have practiced a market based exchange rate largely, though it would be honest to say here that import curbs in some form of the other have had to be maintained, considering pressure on our reserves. And that's fair way to go. For the time being, I don't think Pakistan had any other choice. But one has to remember that this financial year has not come to an end. And I've always maintained that since IMF financing needs are fulfilled for the whole year, that's the best part of being in a program with the IMF, that your financing needs for the whole year are comfortably taken care of, whereas the program was for 9 months. So this is a standby arrangement. It's like an interim government we had to, kind of get us from the old political setup to a new political setup and pass the electoral cycle. We still have some ways to go. The government would have to maintain its upward trajectory on the power and gas tariff adjustments to ensure that the rise of the circular debt is maintained at the minimum. I always say that IMF does not determine Pakistan's pricings. It's the OGRA and NEPRA on the petitions of our companies which determine our pricings. If we want to improve on our pricings, that's something we need to think about ourselves. On the other hand, we also need to consider the fact that a state bank's tight monetary policy or a prudent monetary policy would tend to continue. That's the kind of modeling I think IMF would have done. And that means that we still stay in a kind of a holding period or a stabilization period, at least till the end of FY24. And that would mean that the kind of new job creations and the kind of growth that we want to see in the economy moving forward will still be a bit further into the medium term. And I'd come to the medium term as well. Lastly, we would have to keep on the fiscal consolidation, and we would have to come up with a primary surplus. Primary surplus for viewers means that our fiscal deficit will be a certain amount, amount, 7.5% of GDP. But then when we take out the interest part, we would have a primary balance which is in the positive, and IMF is thinking around 400 billions in the positive. So that would net off and kind of help your debt trajectory on the downward slide. And that's why the IMF keeps this primary balance to be made positive as one of the conditionalities of finishing this year. And of course, we won't be in a program at that time, but I think that's been since implicitly agreed that would be how things would work out. Pakistan's spoken about a new program. That's fair deal. But as I always say, IMF programs are a necessary condition when countries are in trouble in balance of payments challenge, as Pakistan is. But it's not a sufficient condition for any country's prosperity. I don't say that to Pakistan. I say that to any country authority that I speak with. And then I always say that IMF can rescue you, is a good doctor of the ICU, and that's their job. Are they going to fix your energy crisis? I don't think so. Your energy crisis is for you to figure out on the petroleum, gas, as well as the power sector. All three are in distress. So that's something you need to figure out yourself. So I really hope that such things we will do ourselves.
Right, Dr. Najeeb, now when we talk about this statement by the IMF, now they've also said that the authorities also expressed interest in successor medium-term fund-supported program with the aim of permanently resolving Pakistan's fiscal and external sustainability weaknesses, strengthening its economic recovery and laying the foundations for strong, sustainable and inclusive growth. Earlier we saw the new finance minister also alluded to the fact that Pakistan looks forward to have a larger and a longer program with the IMF. Now, the first point that's been made by IMF in this statement relates to strengthening the public finances, including through gradual fiscal consolidation and the broadening the tax base, especially in the undertaxed sectors, and improving the tax administration to improve debt sustainability and create space for higher priority development and social assistance spending to protect the vulnerable. I would like you to shed a bit of light regarding this particular first point that has been made by IMF, the fiscal consolidation part.
So Jawad, this is a very, very important point. Pakistan's federal fiscal framework is certainly under distress. What that means is that this will be the third year running that we'll have a fiscal deficit which is above 7%. For the last 10 years, if you see the FPR tax to GDP, it's hovering around 8.5 to 9%. The provincial taxation is under, I think, 1 percentage point a year. They'll collect about 800 billion this year as in taxes, whereas they have, the GST on services, taxes on agriculture income tax, immovable property. These are quite huge taxation arenas. So what the IMF is saying is that the fiscal consolidation that we were speaking about has to come through either the broadening of the tax base, the provinces gearing up, or expenditure measures. In Pakistan's case, all the above need to be done. And the reason you need to do that is to ensure debt sustainability in the country. Your debt is created when you create a fiscal deficit. It's really, really that simple. I think this year we will have a fiscal deficit around 8,000 billion rupees. So 8,000 billion rupees of new debt would have to be taken to finance that kind of fiscal deficit that will be there in the budget. That's the budget hole. So I would tend to agree with the fund there that Pakistan should put in measures, so should start crafting measures. And here there will be discussion on the NFC award as well. And when I say there will be a discussion, that doesn't mean that you have to go back on what you give to the provinces, but there are many other ways and areas that you can handle the NFC, or you can make the NFC much more efficient, effective, durable, and improve the quality of funding both at the provincial level and at the federal level, and improve the quality of spending. I think that's the kind of ethos that Pakistan needs to work with. Moving forward, that would also help in not only fiscal consolidation, but our fiscal has a correlation with our current account. Our fiscal is impacting our inflation. So seriously, that's a good place to start the repair. But what needs to be now seen is the authorities, the Pakistan authorities, to come up with a fiscal plan which encompasses all the areas that I've spoken to you: taxation, federal and provincial, expenditures, federal and provincial, and then thinking the seventh NFC, where sharing of some expenditures on poverty, on education, on HEC, and then completely devolving the subjects that are provincial subjects. Now, this is reading
Right.
18th Amendment together with the 7th NFC award. And I really hope we can move forward on this kind of thing.
Writer Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, former advisor at the Ministry of Finance, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Haider, now I want you to give your expert analysis regarding this first point that has been made by IMF. So specifically talking about expanding the tax base, broadening the tax base. Now, we have also seen there has been a hint of, expanding it through getting the taxation into the sectors including agriculture, real estate, wholesale and retail. How significant an impact do you think it would have once these sectors are brought into the tax net?
I think naturally, as we see, the contribution of these sectors to towards taxation is relatively lower or quite low in certain instances. So naturally, if it happens, so certainly it will be a new revenue stream for the government. So when a new revenue stream gets added, so naturally governments become more comfortable and government is under lesser pressure to further tax the resources from which it's getting taxes. For example, the salaried class. So salaried class pays. So usually when government gets under pressure, it increases the tax rate, right? So it's automatic deduction, all of us get impacted. Otherwise on utilities or petroleum products, right? So it's easier for all the sales tax. So it's easier for government to do the switch. Now when this additional revenue comes in, so it eases the burden again in terms of the deficits decrease, and in case there's a very large windfall coming in, then the government can spend on development or other positive measures. So that is the holy grail, and I have been listening to many people coming in and wanting and trying to do that over the last 30 years.
How big a potential these sectors actually carry for overall revenue generation?
You see, it's very debatable. I believe retail sector carries a large potential because it does not, in terms of the shopkeepers, they do not get taxed in terms of the direct income taxes, right? So there, I believe if we can come up with some good mean to tax them, and it's not burdensome on them and they're willing to pay. Usually whenever government tries to enter that space, there's a huge reaction and the political government steps back, right? So if the government is able to do that.
What are the primary challenges in that particular direction, and how do you recommend those could be overcome? What sort of policies and strategies should be adopted?
So one strategy that I've heard, I think it's if by trade and by city or area, if we can come up with a minimal standardized tax. For example, if there's a grocery store, right? So if the government can come up with, okay, that only you have to pay 5,000 per month. So it's a fixed thing. You don't get into the assessment of the income and sales, which at times you see when somebody is coming new into the tax net, they're not used to the income self-reporting and all of that mechanism.
If this particular fixed tax regime is going to be applicable across the board.
So that's one of the ideas. That's one of the ideas. If you ask me,
supposedly, if it is applied equally.
Yeah.
So shouldn't the income be taken into account at the end of the day? How much income or the profit a certain retailer, if he is getting more as compared to the one who is getting very less?
Yeah.
So how is it going to be
for example,
suitable for applicability in
okay.
across the board?
So we know they're standardized. You can make categories, right? So there are smaller shopkeepers, which is a just 10 feet by 20 feet shop, and they are general store, right? So you can put them in a certain one category. Superstores, which are larger superstores, convenience stores, which have POS systems. So they're in a different category. Their sales are already getting monitored. because then they are already on sales tax net. So, but these guys, they are not in that net, but their number is huge. So for example, there could be your laundry person, so there is a huge base, there is millions of such businesses, but they do not pay anything, even if they pay 1,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees a month. So suddenly government can have a huge inflow of revenue coming in. Usually what happens is, when you get into this space of assessing their income, then they get really terrified. Then you have these unions, they protest, and then they come up with a lot of pressure, right? So one of the things that I would also say is that in terms of the tax regime, when it's really scary, so tax rates these days are very high. So everyone feels that the moment they start reporting and they get into a tax net, then they are gone, because then if the government further increases the tax rate, so that puts additional pressure on them.
So what's the solution of it? What's the possible solution of it? I'll come back to you for your detailed understanding regarding the possible solutions in this particular direction. For now, we are joined by Dr. Qais Aslam. He's senior economist, joining us on the phone line. Dr. Aslam, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. How do you look at this particular development of the staff level agreement between IMF, the Pakistani authorities, after the second, the final review of the $3 billion SBA has been reached? We have also seen the Pakistani authorities are looking forward to have a longer and a larger midterm program with the IMF, which has also been acknowledged and recognized by the IMF in its statement, pointing to first important step that is the strengthening of the public finances. What steps do you think are required in this particular area in future?
Thank you very much for having me with you. Number one, I think when we were in the PDM-1 government, we knew that this would happen. The PDM government's dialogue with IMF, then some of the things that was being done by the interim government, and then almost the same people, although the phase change between the finance minister and the foreign minister happened. But so I thought that yes, this would happen. Number one, we would get that tranche, 1.1 billion, if that is, and we are going for the for. We are largely dependent on IMF. What I don't understand is that why don't we personally think by ourselves what would we be doing? Why do we have to wait for the IMF to tell us what we are going to do? We can do these reforms with ourselves. There are a lot of good economists, good financiers who can advise these reforms, and IMF will accept them. But yes, we, for the time being, need this money, but at the same time, we need to revamp our system. Now, your question was that how. If you remember, Dr. Shamshad was trying to bring in some FBR reforms, which were not allowed by the Election Commission of Pakistan. So I think they are going to introduce those reforms. They are already there. They are already on the table. What I have never understood is that why does the government depend on tax collection from those FBR officers at the lower level who are not very honest, and we have to change the system to online and using Nadra and such forth. I also agree on the question of tax net, and I think we should be delinking the documentation of the economy from the tax base so that people happily become part of the documentation and then decide how to tax people. Yes, I think a large amount of people who should be in the tax net at a lower level and at a higher level are not being taxed. And salaried class is being taxed and they're being overtaxed. And indirect taxes are there. So I think indirect taxes should be decreased. I think government should not only bring in FBR reforms, it should rethink its budget priorities.
Right, Dr. Aslam, the last point that you've just made, delinking, if I have got it right, delinking the documentation from filing the tax. It's going to make a lot of people happy in filing the tax. Could you shed a little bit of more light on this to elaborate it further? How is that doable?
The FBR makes it easier for themselves that you document the economy, you file the tax return, and then your businesses get, as they call it, white and documented. I personally think there are two ways of other ways of doing things. Number one, assure that there are fixed taxes on certain businesses for the first 2 or 3 years, and if the tax net will not be increased in these 3 years or 4 years, then it would be easier to convince people to bring in, to document their businesses. Otherwise, we are always afraid that I send my returns and next year the taxes could increase. So there has to be some cap on a certain level of taxes so that people don't feel threatened. The other thing that I think is there is that the tax system, the SPR through the NADRA has enough information of commercial connections of gas and electricity. So they can assess people's businesses through commercial, and at least these people can get their tax not through the bill, but like as WAPDA and LESCO sent the electricity bill, the FBR can send a tax return form and ask people to accept it and pay or reject it and come for mitigation, and things would happen. But because FBR doesn't want to do hard work, it puts on the people difficult questions, and the money is made by the lawyers in the middle, tax lawyers and tax officers and such forth. The system has to be revamped and brought in on more scientific lines. There must be countries doing this documentation of the economy without linking it to the tax system.
Right. Dr. Aslam, what about bringing the sectors such as retail, wholesale, real estate and agriculture into the tax net? How big a potential do these sectors carry with themselves?
Yeah, look, number one is that we should not have agriculture income tax and industrial income tax. We should have income tax. Anybody earning an income over and above 400,000 rupees in this country, although I believe now everybody, if you look at the minimum wage, everybody is earning 1,000 rupees, 1,100 rupees a day. So everybody is taxable. What I'm trying to say is that agriculture has to be taxed. Service sector, a large amount of doctors and lawyers and other people who are doing practices are not being taxed. Only their permanent income is being taxed through. And yes, you are right, the retail. The government will have to find a way of ensuring that these unions and these retailers do not put pressure on the government by strikes. Tax has to be paid. But what I think all of us are saying is tax has to be rationalized first. It should be easy to pay. It should be affordable to pay, and it should be, as we say, the fine should be matching the crime. We have given too many powers to FDR. So I think a large amount, there are a lot of rich people in this country, especially the real estate. They have been given the amnesties. I think Imran Khan's government gave the 13th or 14th amnesty in this country. I don't understand why those who avoid taxes are given amnesties and those who pay taxes all their life are burdened. That cannot happen. You have to rationalize the tax system. You have to make it easy. You have to make it affordable, and everybody has to pay tax, not indirect tax, but direct taxes. And it can happen through modern means of IT and communication.
Writer Dr. Qais Aslam, senior economist, joining us on the phone line. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Haider, now going back to the same point as we were discussing before, Dr. Qais Aslam joined in. The challenges, what could be the possible solutions as far as you were mentioning regarding the retail sector?
So we're talking specifically about the tax piece, right? So in terms of solution of the tax piece, I would say, in my opinion, right now, everyone, the whole population is feeling the burden of the taxes, right? So irrespective, especially when you're talking about small shopkeepers and all, they are paying a lot of taxes, indirect taxes. They are paying taxes even at their homes, maybe. You see, you need to have income, just like one of the speakers just said. You need to have certain income to be able to pay that electricity bill or the gas bill, which is really, really high, right? So indirectly, all of people, the non-salaried people, they are paying those taxes, right? The problem, what is happening is that it's not proportionate to the income, right, which you were also talking about. So we need to start shifting to taxing those economic activities. You see, because it may be seen as a radical view. In my opinion, when we really raise the electricity tariffs or the gas tariffs, and people are shifting to solar, which the government is encouraging. So it's encouraging people to get off the grid, because once you're off the grid, then you don't have to pay these taxes, right? So these electricity bills or your petrol pump, all of they are also tax collectors on the behalf of the government. They are collecting a lot of taxes. So I believe we should move towards that. And then in the agriculture sector, I believe the holy grail is, if you also analyze business, it's not the farmer, it is the arti or the wholesaler who buys in bulk from all of the farmers, stores it, and then later sells it at exorbitant prices, right? And they're making a lot of capital gains either through hoarding or through other means. And their whole piece is undocumented. At times they buy the commodity from the farmers and they pay them later, right? So those are the activities where people are making large amounts of money. There are not a lot of people, and taxing them naturally is quite difficult. And that is where we can get some extra juice. In terms of smaller people, and there's a large majority of those people, it would be difficult. But in my opinion, again, shopkeepers, certain shopkeepers, you can impose 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, depending on their activity. And that would be something they would be happy to do. Just like he was talking about, if we, I think it's a good thing for another reason, I think, if we disconnect the documentation part, so people would be happy to pay up rather than government wanting to get into the documentation. Sorry?
How is that doable? Delinking documentation with filing the taxes?
Because anyone who is doing a business in a, for example, in terms of retail, right? So you're doing a business at a specific shop. So just like they pay a rent, right? So if you're doing a business at a specific place, so then you can develop that, okay, if you have, it's sort of having a local license to operate as a shopkeeper of a particular line of business. So different line of business may have different taxes. So it would be easier for the government to assess one time that a barber pays this much, a barber shop or a general store pays this much.
The second point that has been mentioned by IMF, I just want you to have a quick analysis of this: restoring the energy sector's viability by accelerating cost reducing reforms, including through improving electricity transmission and distribution, moving captive power demand to the electricity grid, strengthening distribution company governance and management, undertaking effective anti-theft measures.
So I think pretty much you can ignore the earlier part. Essentially, it's why do we have the line losses? It's primarily due to, yes, we have old infrastructure, we need to reinvest in that. But a large part of that is also driven due to the electricity theft. And it is not just, I mean, this is on the power sector, right? Same goes on the gas sector also. So our loss rates have increased. And because of those losses, again, what happens is IMF also recommends that the secular debt should not be increasing. That's what it's saying in the statement. But what happens then is IMF says, okay, you should be collecting more revenue through the bills. So now everyone is screaming that the bills are going through the roof, right? So you would be experiencing that, I'm experiencing that, the camera person would be experiencing that. And all of us, we are paying more and more. Why? Because we have to compensate for other people who are
not paying.
Who are stealing.
Who are stealing.
Who are stealing. So now, again, in terms of one radical thing that I can recall is, during Musharraf era, there was this crackdown.
There was a recent crackdown also.
Recent crackdown also, and even in that era. So when this happened, I had recollection of the previous one also. So it's not a new thing, but army essentially went in, and there are a lot of these, people were stealing, and they cut all of those cables, and then they cut the connections from those areas also. So they need to be very aggressive in force, because those people steal, then everybody else has to pay.
Compensate.
Honest people have to compensate,
but this
and
time
then it distorts everything.
The criminal activity has been, proceedings have been initiated against all those who have been involved in this malpractice.
You see, one of the measures that the government took was, if you recall, in the exchange rate. So there was a lot of illegal activity, and the USD to PKR, it went up to 300, 315, and the government did the crackdown on illegal activity, a very effective crackdown. Yes, exactly, and it has come down to this level. So similar thing can happen here, which can create fiscal space.
Mr. Sultan Ali Haider, expert political economy, and thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for being with us.